Let's talk about the A&M defensive line today. And to help me break it all down, we got Robert Behrens of Good Bull Hunting. You might know him as the ratio king of Aggie Twitter. Robert, tell us who you are, what you do, and where they can find you.
Yeah, so like you said, my name's Robert Behrens. I'm class of 2005, and managing editor over at Good Bull Hunting, which is Texas A&M's team site within the SB Nation network. And if you're not familiar with us already, obviously cover all the nuts and bolts of A&M sports, but we also like to have fun. We like to remind people that amongst all of the hand wringing and misery that can come with being an A&M fan, sports are supposed to be fun, and that's why we all follow it to begin with. So we try to find the levity even when it sometimes is hard to find. Um, for myself personally, yeah, you can find me primarily on X over at RCB05, which is an equal part combination of hyping up A&M and trolling Longhorn fans.
The trolling is must see. I don't know, must see TV, must see social media, guys. He does a great job with it. Check out Good Bull Hunting. They have great stuff there. And I try to, take after you a little bit in that levity after losses because, we've had some disappointment in recent years. And that's a great way to handle things. It's supposed to be fun. We have fun with it, win or loss. It's hard, but we try our best to do it. But thanks for doing the show, Robert. I wanted to start a little bit big picture. While I have you on, I'd like to kind of get your overall take. Just kind of give me your general feel for this 2025 team. You've been doing this longer than I have. You've seen a lot more iterations of this team than I have. And, knowing that, I was just kind of curious how you perceive this year two Mike Elko football team.
I feel like, and I think a lot of the fan base is in this same boat, that I'm very much in a I need to see it stage. Um, and we're gonna go through defensive line today, and we're gonna talk about probably a lot of reasons why you can be optimistic about that group, and that's the case for a lot of the position groups on this A&M team. So if you want to buy in and you want to believe, um, it's not hard to talk yourself into it. I think the issue with A&M and for Aggies is that that's been the case a lot of years, and there's been a lot of years where that's ended up in 8-4 or worse. And so we're sitting here as of date of recording. It's August 6th. So we're very much in the throes of that time of year where that skepticism starts to kind of get eaten away, and we all just start to fully buy in and think this is going to be the year. Uh, I'm not sure I'm quite there yet, but um, I'm. I guess more than anything, I would say this team cannot surprise me because if they go 10-2 and they're in the playoff and they got a rock solid offensive line and Marcel Reed is taking the next step and the secondary is shored up and everything goes the way we had hoped, then yeah, I mean, we all kind of saw the seeds of that. If they falter and end up 7-5 from losing a couple close games and one that they just should not have lost, period, uh, that wouldn't surprise me either because we've seen it so many times, and that's not always a fun place to be. But I feel like it's where a lot of the fan base is, and probably will be at least until that week 3 game against Notre Dame when we can overreact wildly in either direction.
Yep. Looking forward to that. But yeah, man, when you break it down position group by position group, obviously, as with a lot of A&M teams before, there's a lot to be excited for. And this year, I think one of the hallmarks is there's a lot of good continuity. And I think that can be kind of hard to come by in today's day and age. But I think there's a world where we see a much more improved on-field product game to game. But with the schedule shift year to year now, where all of your home games become road games the next year, I just think there's some pitfalls in this schedule. Maybe A&M wins one of those, big 3 road games on the year, but has A&M gotten over that hurdle of beating every team they're supposed to? They haven't done that recently. It's been a long time since that's happened. So there's reason to believe you could see a much improved team and still have a 8-4, 9-3 season to show for. And of course, 9-3 would be progress. But of course, like you said, August 6th, we're in the heat of fall camp right now. We're getting fall camp clips. And this is what a lot of people are doing right now. And I just want to see if you're on the same page. Are you changing your entire season outlook based on a practice clip right now?
No, and not in either direction.
Right.
Because once again, like if you followed the sport for any amount of time, you've seen the good and the bad. It was not just 2 days ago that I was having to fight myself with that urge because we're starting to see those first practice clips of Jerome Miles out there.
Oh yeah.
And you say, man, it's like this guy's really big and he looks really fluid. But there have been so many times over the years that you hear so and so's lighting it up in practice, but then that doesn't really mean anything once the real games start, or vice versa. You hear about, oh, this unit's gonna be a disaster, and then they actually turn out to be pretty okay. Because look, I don't think the coaches and even the team know a lot of that stuff definitively yet. So how the heck would we?
Exactly. And a lot of things change as soon as there's a different opponent in front of you, particularly when it's opponent like that week 3 game in Notre Dame. That should be really fun and telling early in the year. But looking at practice clips, seems like every single year the A&M defensive line stands out. It's an SEC defensive line. It always has that look about it. So let's get into this unit. It's a group where you lose the most as a team. If you're looking at your team losing productive players from the year before, you have 3 players drafted and they're all from the defensive line. It's well documented. We all know that. But as talented and as decorated as that line was, and as much as you lost from that unit, I think most Aggies would say that overall that unit disappointed last year, even with the talent, even with the individual players you had. Sure, they had some high highs in that LSU game, Missouri, even the Arkansas game. But in others, particularly in those 4 losses, very little impact. So in your opinion, going back to last year, why did this unit disappoint relative to the clear level of talent that they had? Was it just on them? Was it schematic? Was it this defense as a whole? Kind of take me through in your mind what went wrong there.
I think it's hard to nail it down to just one thing. And with defense, just philosophically, it's hard to look at these units in a vacuum because, yes, there were times where that defensive line was not making an impact on the game, but there were just as many other times where you saw them getting consistent pressure, but it's the quarterbacks are just getting that ball out within 1.5, 2 seconds, and they're finding open receivers consistently.
Yeah.
And so if you're not playing complementary football on all 3 levels, even if one unit is doing great, they can struggle to have an impact consistently. And I think that's a big part of what we saw last year. Just based on Mike Elko's comments and the moves they made with that defensive coaching staff in this offseason, I think it's pretty obvious that the secondary was an issue, and that's something that they have hopefully addressed and are going to see improvement from. And I think it would be foolish to think that that didn't impact that defensive line group's productivity negatively across last season.
Yeah, absolutely. You have receivers running free. You have, lightning fast times to throw. You're not going to get the sack numbers you feel like you're capable of. And if you look at the PFF numbers, several games on the year, quarterbacks had season high time to pass against A&M. That's partially scheming around that defensive line, and that's a credit to them. But some of that is secondary stuff. I mean, obviously losing Tyreek Chappelle was a big deal. We've heard a lot about him so far early in camp and what his impact could be coming back to this team. I mean, in some of the big losses of the year, you didn't have Will Lee. Auburn, Will Lee went down early. Bowl game, Will Lee went down early. Those are big pieces of a big ripple effect. And a secondary that was also starting a really young player. So it goes hand in hand. Like you said, complementary football wasn't always there for A&M. And of course, I mean, versus LSU, that was a great defensive line game. Like the games I mentioned, there were some high highs. And yeah, you're probably going to miss out on the upside of some of those players. But you bring back a couple of guys that were, consistent forces for the defensive line. You don't lose everything. I think a Cassius Howell and Albert Regis are good pieces to get back, especially Howell. He's a ton of upside. We'll talk about him in a bit. But I want to start with the interior because I think when you're breaking this team down, you're looking at all the position groups and you're looking for questions that come up with every college football team year on year, players leaving, players stepping up. I think defensive tackle is one of the more interesting ones to look at because at the top, you have full clarity about who your main guys are, but it's not enough veteran, personnel to fill out a rotation. And behind that, there's a level of question there. So I want to start with the veterans, Regis, Onyedem, and Hicks. And I really wanted to get your thoughts on DJ Hicks first and foremost, because of all the guys really on this defense, maybe I think he has a very high chance to elevate this defense with his potential and what we've seen in high school and the body, the physical attributes. And, you might not have that in all your other guys on the defensive line, even amongst those veterans, what DJ Hicks can bring. And it's been kind of maybe a steady build, a very slow climb for DJ Hicks. Didn't do much his freshman year, played a lot in that Oklahoma State bowl game. I think that first spring game was a little bit rough for him. What is a spring game, though? Why is that a data point? But I think last year you finally saw him maybe holding his own a little bit better mid-portion and late in the year. But what's the next step for DJ Hicks, and what do you think the outlook for a player like that could be?
I mean, I think he's that kind of guy that is a former 5-star player. He's coming into his 3rd season, and especially for an interior defensive lineman, this is kind of when you expect them to make that jump. Even though freshmen making an impact right away, or even in their second year, is becoming more and more common, the one place that is the least common is interior defensive line. And so I don't think that we should look at necessarily that he's underachieved, but maybe he's just on schedule for what his development should have been. But I fully agree with you that just because of that 5-star pedigree, kind of what the quote unquote experts say is his ceiling, I think he absolutely stands out amongst that group as a guy who, if he really can elevate and he can become a premier interior lineman in the SEC, that just, high tide lifts all boats, and that has ripple effects across this entire defense.
Yeah, you're talking about 3 years of kind of building into the position, because in high school he was kind of more of a hybrid player, was able to play a little bit outside. So I think now he's really looking big and looking the part, and he really did last year. But now upperclassman years, this is when you really feel like it can culminate, and it's a really, really exciting player to watch. Top of my watch list going into the year. But to contrast kind of that, breakout nature of DJ Hicks, the other 2 veterans you bring in are a couple of just rock steady dudes. Onyedem from Iowa State, lots of snaps, lots of productivity. Not really a big play guy, but a guy that's seen a lot, a guy that's also played inside and outside. But we bring back Albert Regis, and this has been a guy that, played a lot of snaps in 2021, I believe. He's been around a long time. It's his 5th year. So what have you seen from Regis over his years at A&M, and what exactly does a guy like that bring to the defensive line? He's actually transformed his body quite a bit these last couple of off seasons. Looks like a much less wasted weight now. What do you think he could bring this defensive line in a year where he loses those stars that were around him?
I think Regis always stood out to me as one of those guys that, like you said, not a lot of recruiting hype, not a lot of high expectations when he came to College Station, but found his way onto the field. And, sometimes they're just those players that every time you see someone making a good play, you look up and you're like, oh, who is that? And you're like, oh, that was Albert Regis.
Yeah.
And I remember saying the same thing Bryce Anderson's freshman year. It felt like every time he was on the field, he was making an impact. And so Regis has been that way. Yeah, like you said, it feels like it's been half a decade at this point. And just one of those like steady veteran presences that you really need, on a defensive line in particular, but just in college football, just with the way the portal is, and so many guys leave early for the NFL, to have a player who has been with this program his entire career, that's a multi-year starter, I think is invaluable.
Yeah, he's always found a role for himself despite those NFL picks that have been around him. That's commendable. He actually led the team in swatted passes amongst defensive linemen last year as 6. Just a kind of a sneaky, smart player. I'm excited for him. I don't know. Maybe there's another step to his game now that it's the final year. It's the money year. Like I said, he's been really grinding in the off seasons. I think last year he dropped 20 pounds, and now he's put 5 back on. Looks good. So we'll see what he does. I know he's going to eat a ton of the share of reps here, and he's just a steady guy that doesn't hurt you when he's out there. But can he bring that next level? I'm really curious to see what else he can bring in this senior and final money-making year. But beyond that trio, this is where things get interesting. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on what happens here. It's a lot of uncertainty and who's going to earn the reps in the game, in games. And it's a bunch of young guys. You talked about how you really don't see a lot of freshmen impacting defensive line. Well, you're going to see freshmen playing defensive line at the defensive tackle position for A&M in 2025. in a meaningful way because you're going to go 4 or 5 deep here. I think last year was, a relatively shorter leash in terms of the rotation, but you still need at least 4. So talk to me about this young core behind that trio at the top. Who's vying for reps? And in your eyes, who has the best chance of emerging this fall?
No, if you're looking for inside information, you're going to the wrong person for sure.
Just
But
your feel, just a
yeah,
feel.
yeah. Oh, dude, I operate purely on vibes when it comes to Aggie football.
That's me too, man.
Um, I mean, I would say from that freshman class, we've heard nothing but glowing reviews about both DJ Sanders and Landon Rink.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both watching the high school tape and then once they both got on campus in January. So um, certainly TBD on exactly what those reps look like and what that impact is. But it's hard to imagine that you're not seeing those guys out there. Probably even week one, just
Yeah.
because when you kick off the season with UTSA, all due respect to the Roadrunners, if that game is still a game in the fourth quarter, I think we're all in for a rough ride this year. So
Yeah.
so whether those guys are a part of that main core of rotation or not, I think we're gonna see them out there and get a look at what they can do.
Yeah. And I've been thinking that this is the best course of action, particularly in those first 2 games. You want to get these guys reps. It could be those two. Um, I think Chase Sims is a guy that could fight in there. I've
That's
always
true.
felt like the one that is the most ready are the 2 that you just mentioned there. I felt like those are the guys that probably have the bodies that are good to go right away this fall. And of course, Dalen Evans, a guy who's gained some weight, a guy that, got complimented by Elko the other day, and we take those with a grain of salt for sure. Um, I think they got to play a lot early because unfortunately, and you have to talk about it, you don't want to see it, but you're an injury away from those guys having a massively elevated role. So UTSA, Utah State, I mean, more so than mop-up duty, I honestly want to see those guys in the rotation earlier than maybe they would versus Notre Dame, just to get them some real live bullets in the chamber because, you know, you need that. You need to get something under the belt there. But that's, I think, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but that might be one of the least secure depth positions on the team. Would you think that's one of the more shakier depth parts because of the drop off in experience there?
Yeah, I would say so because we talked about Regis and Hicks, who everyone is very familiar with, but outside of that, there's a lot of names that we know, but guys that we really haven't seen a lot of, at least not in an A&M uniform.
Yeah.
And that's a stark contrast from kind of what A&M fans have gotten used to over the
Yeah.
past several seasons, where we had the problem of like, how are we going to work all of these 4 and 5 star defensive tackles into the lineup?
Yeah.
Whereas now we're like, do we have 4 legit defensive tackles?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I agree. I think it's the easily probably the thin. I would say that maybe wide receiver, maybe the thinnest groups on the team, but defensive tackle maybe even more of an unknown
Yeah.
quantity.
Yeah. Yeah. And then one more thing on the defensive tackles. I mean, I'm raising some questions here because I don't want to be caught just sunshine pumping every position group because you can very easily do that if you're let yourself. Because there's a lot to be excited for with this team. But one thing that to me might be a little hold up, it was last year. It had some impact last year. There were some big running plays you gave up in big spots on the team last year. But we've had a couple years of not having that true like McKinley Jackson nose archetype. And that's going to be the case again this year. Do you think that's something that could hold A&M back? Do you think there's enough size to get around with this unit? I like to have one of those guys in this conference, but I mean, Regis 6'2", 315. Hicks, I don't know what he's listed at now, but he looks big. Is there enough size here?
You know, I found it interesting that you looked at the updated roster for A&M, and you kind of saw a pretty consistent trend across the board of a lot of those guys dropping weight.
Yeah.
Which I feel like this is normally the time of year where we're all hyping up all the guys who got bigger. But you saw a lot of A&M players who did get smaller,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're assuming that's an intentional choice. I can't imagine it's not.
Right.
And if that's the case, as much as we all want to sit here and harken back to the joys of having that elite kind of nose tackle. Maybe this is a schematic thing. Maybe this is what Elko and Jay Baven are wanting out of their interior defensive line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because look, the game changes every single year, and so maybe they're trying something different. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that maybe that's something intentional because what was intentional is the players you bring in at defensive end. And just like this defensive tackle, they brought in some lighter guys. Last year you started, Stewart and Scorton, and those guys were 280 apiece, more or less. And now I think your biggest defensive end is Dayon Hayes at like 260, 265. And that'll be a lighter outfit too. But transitioning in this defensive end position, it's a unit that I'm really trying not to get too excited about, but there are a lot of bodies that I'm really excited to see come UTSA game because it's a new look. I mean, obviously you're missing two NFL, they're both top 2 rounders, but you know, Cassius Howell might have been the most consistent defensive end last year. I don't know if he had as many of the huge plays that Scorton had, but he certainly had a better stat profile than Stewart. And we know Stewart was always like a step away. That always happened with Stewart. But whenever Howell was out there, he seemed to be productive. And now he finds himself in an expanded role. So talk to me, in your eyes, what do you see in Cassius Howell? What makes him special? And maybe what he needs to improve on now with that expanded role, probably being a down-to-down player as a lighter guy in this A&M defense.
I think the biggest thing that he brings is, well, I mean, I was just looking at practice interview videos today. I mean, that dude is. You say he's only what, 260, 250.
Yeah.
That dude he's ready to play.
Yeah, he is. He is.
Um, but more than anything, he just brings so much experience, not just obviously at A&M last year, but also in his time in the G5, leading his conference in sacks. He's seen that steady progression where he is that fourth year player. Is he fourth year or is he fifth year?
I don't know. I think he's fourth, but I could be wrong.
Okay. But either way, you're not relying on an underclassman here to step in and play that major role. This is a grown man who has seen a lot in college football, and so I think both physically and also from the mental perspective, you kind of count on that he's ready to take that on. And oh my gosh, like as much as we all hate talking about that bowl game against USC, that dude was wrecking shop in that
Oh,
game.
yeah.
And so that, in addition to flashes throughout the rest of last season, that got me hyped for what his potential is.
Oh, yeah. I just looked it up. 5th-year senior. Could have been a pick last year. He could have gone pro last year. We heard them talk about that today. I think they mentioned that Elko maybe had him valued as around a 3rd rounder. I don't know. I'm no draft expert, but I think that's a trend with this team. I think him, Will Lee, and Armage all probably could have gotten picked last year. And I think maybe the latter years of Jimbo, you maybe struggled to keep guys that were kind of on that borderline, and you did that in a pretty significant way this year. And those are the kind of guys that'll lead your defense. And obviously, we're looking at Howell and Will Lee as 2 of the main pieces on this defense. Huge to get back. But, you also bring back a Rylan Kennedy. And I think this is a guy that the coaches have done nothing but rave about. He's a guy we've seen transform from, incoming freshman to now. I mean, he looks totally different. Looks like a freaking Spartan out there. I mean, he's a guy I'm very excited about. But talk about the newcomers here because you have those 2 and the rest are newcomers, I believe. I don't think anybody else came back because you obviously lose Scylla to the portal. You lose E&I White to the portal, and who knows what they would have been, kind of shaky up and down, 10 years at A&M. But this defense invested hard in one spot on this unit, and it was defensive end. You bring in TJ Searcy from Florida, Dayon Hayes from Colorado and Pitt, Sam Mpemba from UGA. Guy I'm really high on is Dayon Hayes. The Pitt film looks really good coming off of an injury. I mean, what do you expect to get out of these guys? Do you expect all 3 of these guys to make an impact? There's a lot of bodies to go here. Anybody kind of on your radar in this list?
Well, and I will always talk about Rylan Kennedy just because.
Okay, take the opportunity. Go for it.
Yeah. He was a guy that just for those that don't know, he had given up football. He was focusing on basketball in high school, and then his senior year, I don't remember if he was a coach or, but someone was like, you should give football another go, and so he plays football at defensive end while also being like a state champion high jumper. And and all of a sudden, like he gets November of his senior year, and now all of a sudden he's getting offers from A&M and Texas and Clemson and like everybody. Um,
Dang.
so just like I remember at the time, he was like a 3-star, maybe a low 4-star recruit by the end of it all. But I was just so excited about that potential because you saw what all these schools saw. That he was like maybe a couple years away, but that the sky was the limit as far as what he could turn himself into. And so I think here we are now 2.5 years later, and you're hoping to see the fruits of that labor. And like you said, he has really completely transformed from what he looked like just a few years ago to where he looked like just a really skinny,
Hmm.
lanky but athletic dude to someone who now looks like an SEC defensive end.
And now that you say
Um,
that, I mean, he looked like a basketball player, and
yeah,
now he looks like a true defensive end ready for the
it's crazy.
SEC. And that transformation is going to take a place. I mean, he played last year. He had a significant role last year. I think he was kind of the last guy in that defensive end rotation. I think it was like a 4-man rotation consistently, and he was in that thing. So really exciting piece. I would say I think the coaches have some level of expectation, but I would say somewhat of a wild card for this defense can really elevate it if he brings what we see in glimpses and see in just what he looks like in pads. Really exciting guy. But if you want to touch on those defensive ends that we brought in the portal, go for that.
Yeah, I will say I feel like Deion Hayes was one that when the commitment happened, there wasn't like a whole lot of fanfare around him.
That's
He
right.
wasn't like a super highly coveted recruit because he was coming off an injury, so he didn't really play very much. Did he play at all in 2024?
I think he might have played the first game or two.
Yeah, that sounds right. But I mean, even for me, like it happened, and you're kind of like, okay, like
Yeah.
it'll be a depth piece, whatever. Um, but you, through the spring, in the spring game in particular, and then continuing now in fall camp, I feel like you've heard this drumbeat of positive news surrounding Deion Hayes, and so it's kind of gone from a guy that you think is just there to fill out the depth chart to okay, I think this is going to be a guy that's going to play a pretty meaningful role on this team, and to the point that that role might be starting defensive end on the other side of Cassius Howell. Um,
Yeah, and that's actually my current prediction. I mean, I just throw stuff out there. I don't know, but if I'm looking at this defensive end unit, he's also a 6th-year guy. He has an injury redshirt and he's a COVID guy, so he's been around forever. He's gonna be 24 this month. So you bring that maturity, you bring that body maturity in, and he is the biggest defensive end. If you need someone to start and be that strong side build, he's 265. He's probably one of the stronger guys with that maturity. I think it works across from Howell.
yeah, and then just touching quickly on Searcy, I would say, I mean, I know almost nothing about him other than
Yeah.
obviously coming from Florida, and obviously that was Jay Bateman's previous stop, so Jay Bateman intimately familiar with the players on that roster, and I remember we took it a guy who seemingly no one really there wanted to keep around anymore in Scooby Williams, and that worked out just fine.
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and trust Jay Bateman on that one, and that we're going to
Yeah.
see another worthwhile addition there.
Yeah, and it's a guy that started for Florida, a guy that played a lot down the stretch. He was on the All SEC freshman team his freshman year in 2023. Best game of the year last year came in the last regular season game versus Florida State. I don't know if he starts, what he plays, but you just like to have a guy like that in your rotation. It's SEC experience, and that's not always easy to come by. And then obviously Mpemba is just, I think, more of a project piece. Maybe he will round out to be some depth. Body looks good. I mean, that's never been an issue at A&M, but he looks really, really good in these clips we're getting. We'll see what happens there, how that thing shakes out. But we can't go talking about this defensive end unit without mentioning Marco Jones. I mean, it's almost like a meme at this point. His spring game, what was it, 6 sacks in the spring game? Just something ridiculous.
Yeah, it was nuts.
Yeah,
Um,
just living in the backfield. But what do you see? I mean, can he carve himself a role this year?
I think he can, man. Because look, you go back to his high school highlights, it looks a lot like that spring game did.
Yeah.
And and if you listen to Mike Elko at the signing day press conference last year, Elko said that they had Marco Jones graded as the best pass rusher in the country at high
Yeah.
school last year. So it and based on that spring game, it sure seems like that was a pretty accurate evaluation. Now, granted, still a freshman, still not as big as he's going to be probably in a year or two. But you just see a lot of the natural ability because with pass rush especially, it feels like so much of that is just that innate ability, whether it's flexibility or reflexes or strength that you can enhance it, but it's also just one of those things that you either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And he seems like a guy that has it, and for that reason, I think he's going to be someone that you see out there pretty often.
Yeah, I think he might be one of the go-to third down guys. He might be a guy that you see play more and more as the year goes on. In high school, I was doing some research on him in preparation for this. Played linebacker, was a major pass rush guy at that position, has all the bend you want, obviously has the size. You're just talking about all that stuff. The only thing that he needs to add are just those defensive end counters at the point of contact. That's like the last thing he needs. But you talked about his size. I mean, he's already 6'5", 250. I mean, what can he become? Because he's going to grow, like you said. So it's really exciting. He's going to have a role in a year where you have a lot of upperclassmen in a room. That's a sign of things to come for a guy like Marco Jones. He's a guy that I think when we were breaking down this recruiting class, this guy we had circled like 3 times. He's like, okay, I know he's not the highest rated in this class, but this might be the most impactful player we just snagged here. But I'll end with, I think we kind of touched on this at the beginning of the defensive end conversation. I mean, it's another lighter unit. It's another lighter outfit. Any issues there? Last year, Anna maybe struggled setting the edge, even with a couple of 280 pounders, especially early. I felt like you outside contain was kind of a weakness in this run stop defense at times for the team. I mean, do you think maybe being lighter can help this thing out, even in the outside run game?
Um, I mean, we'll find out, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm gonna, but
yeah,
I mean, from listening to Elko and Bateman talk about it, it certainly seems like they attributed a lot of the struggles with facing the run last year a lot more about not having the right fits and guys not really being where
yeah,
they were supposed to be, like not covering the right gap, whatever, versus just getting physically outmatched.
yeah,
And so I think that's one of those where you just kind of hope that you're in year 2. So you have it not only comfort level from the players, but also just the coaches. I think knowing the players better and using them better, that you're going to see improvement there.
yeah.
And that's this is that time of year you can analyze and break stuff down, and then at some point you just cross your fingers and hope that it all works.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. You looking at the games, I mean, you had safeties attacking the wrong gaps. You had linebackers early in the year, particularly, getting into the wrong gaps, not on time where they're supposed to be. More so, I think, than like you said, getting physically outmatched at any time. But again, you are lighter, and let's just hope that doesn't become the case this year. I don't think it will be. I think you might be pretty happy with the pass rush look you get out of these bodies. I think that aspect looks pretty promising with this unit, with a Howell, with a Kennedy, with a Marco Jones. But we'll finish the show with this. We talked about kind of some of the overall issues that extend out into that back 7, and we can bring that up here. But how can this be a more productive defensive line in 2025 than 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just does come down to playing complementary football and
Yeah.
actually having all of those units lift each other up. Because I mean, the secondary last year, it wasn't abysmal the entire year, but I mean, it definitely lost this team games. It lost them the USC game. I would argue it lost them the Auburn game. And so if you see improvement there, which like I said, A&M brought in guys from the portal. They get guys back from injury. They brought in a new coach that's going to be over that area. So there are legit reasons to believe, other than just hopes and dreams, that we are going to see improvement there. And I think that's going to help this defense across the board. You add in bringing back Torian York and hopefully a healthy Scooby Williams at linebacker. And so I think having so much continuity at the rest of that defense that we hope to see be even better than it was last year uh, will help, I guess, bolster what is, like we said, is a lot of new on the defensive line. But just because of the way A&M recruits and the development that we're hoping to see under a Mike Elko / Tommy Moffitt program, I think there's definitely like lots of reason to, like, for optimism to think that you're going to have some guys who could be just absolute monsters on that line. And, you know, look, if you've got 4 guys out there, if you've got 2 of them that are just eating people alive, defense gets a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's gonna be really exciting to see. I like some of the new looks, the new bodies we have out there, but just seeing that, 5th year for Howell, getting Regis back late, seeing the next level of Rylan Kennedy. It's gonna be really fun to see because there's reason to believe that the secondary can take another step, getting healthy and just that continuity we're talking about. And I totally agree. It's all about complementary football. You can't let the quarterback get in that thing out super quickly. You can't have receivers running free. And then the same, other side of that token, you can't just have the quarterback having, unlimited time in the pocket. So they got to help each other out. There's a good chance it does with all the continuity you have around. And just, like you said, Elko, everywhere he's been, year-on-year improvement has been there, particularly in the pass defense, but overall for defenses, Elko defenses get better year to year. And what was it? There was someone who was asked earlier this year, I think it was Marcus Radcliffe in camp, one word to describe Elko's defense. And the word he used was complicated. So yeah, these things take a couple years, and we'll see what that looks like at the defensive line this year. Well, all right, Robert, it was good talking to you. Glad to have you on, man. Make sure you guys check him out at Good Bull Hunting, and plug your Twitter one more time.
It's RCB05.
Great follow, guys.
Short and sweet.
Short and sweet. Easy to remember. All right, Robert, I'm going to get you out of here. Thanks for being here, man. Gig 'em.
Yegum.